Welcome to the Climate Book Review. The Climate Book Review is a radio show and podcast featuring book reviews and reading lists for fiction, nonfiction, and poetry with climate themes. The Climate Book Review airs every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Central on WDBX 91.1 FM, solar-powered community radio for Southern Illinois. You can also find the show online at wdbx.org, climatebookreview.com, and on your favorite podcast app or site. The Climate Book Review is hosted by me, Tree Song. The two main segments of the show are the Climate Book of the Week and the Climate Reading List of the Week. If you have suggestions for the show, please email us at info@climatebookreview.com. Now it's time for the Climate Book of the Week. This week's Climate Book of the Week is What If We Get It Right? What a fun question, eh? One of the greatest challenges facing authors of climate nonfiction, climate fiction, and climate communication in general can be summed up in a single sentence. How do we convey the urgency and severity of the climate crisis without leaving our audience feeling like there's nothing they can do about it? There are no quick and easy answers to this question. Climate authors and climate communicators almost inevitably err in one direction or the other, either leaving their audience in a cloud of gloom and doom, or convincing their audience that we can solve everything by installing a few solar panels and voting differently in a few years. And then there are books like What If We Get It Right by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. What if we get it right? What If We Get It Right asks one of the most important questions any climate author or climate communicator can ask. What if we get it right? What if we make the changes we need to make in our communities, cities, states, nations, and world in order to resolve the climate crisis in alignment with our principles and practices of environmental and climate justice? What would that look like? And how do we get from here to there? This is a simple question. Each of us can probably come up with some meaningful and potentially actionable ideas in response to this question. But here's another question. What would it look like if we posed this question to dozens of experts and organizers who are actively working on programs and policies that are each answering this question in their own way in practice? That's the premise and the power of What If We Get It Right. Rather than try to write her own book-length synopsis of what she learned by talking to all these experts and organizers, Johnson chose to compile her interviews with them and share them with readers. We, the readers, get to follow along with Johnson in her journey of climate discovery. We get to hear from people who are active in their fields about what they're working on and what they would like to see happen going forward. Johnson herself serves as both a tour guide and a co-contributor on this journey, sharing her own stories and offering some helpful framing and context for the interviews and for the other pieces included in the book. The end result is a comprehensive overview of what it might look like if we get it right, on many aspects of the climate crisis and our response to it. So why is it such an important question for the climate movement and the world in general? What If We Get It Right offers a powerful contribution to the discourse on the climate crisis for at least two important reasons. First, it provides a thorough overview of many different types of climate solutions that are already in progress, and many more that are on the horizon, if only we can muster the economic and political support necessary to make them a reality. Second, and perhaps most importantly, it provides the audience with a compelling narrative about the climate crisis and climate justice. It emphasizes the importance of envisioning solutions, working together with others in support of those solutions, and ensuring that those solutions are rooted in the principles of environmental and climate justice. Otherwise, we'll just be continuing and replicating the same systems of oppression and exploitation, but with different technology. This book was published in September of 2024, so the tone is far more upbeat and solutions-focused than so much of the public discourse on climate since the re-election of Donald Trump. Some cynics may wonder if a book focused on innovative climate solutions and climate justice even has any relevance anymore, in a time when the climate movement is busy scrambling to resist a resurgence in fossil fuel development and environmental regulation rollbacks. But the solution-focused and justice-oriented narrative of What We Get It Right is now more important than ever. Of course, the resistance component of the climate movement has an essential role to play too. But if there's no popular vision for climate solutions that benefit the public, then the future course of our society will be charted by fossil capital and its defenders. What If We Get It Right offers a bold vision of many climate solutions that are rooted in scientific evidence and the principles of climate justice. The climate movement and the world in general need such visions now more than ever. So what topics does the book explore? What If We Get It Right covers so much important ground that it's hard to summarize it all without reading the entire book. There's also so much personality and culture in this book that a dry summary of the overarching themes can't do it justice. However, a compelling summary can explain why this will be a rewarding read for so many climate-concerned readers. The book is organized into 8 main parts that each explore a different theme. Each part includes a combination of interviews, poetry, art, and commentary related to the theme. I also appreciated the fact that the majority of these parts start with a list of 10 problems and 10 possibilities that are all related to that part's themes. These lists serve as both a concise overview of many of the important points related to that theme and a way of framing the discourse in the interviews and the content. So I will say a little bit about each theme, but you can read the full review or read the full book in order to get the full story. So the first theme is possibility. Possibility introduces the overall concepts and inspiration of the book. The first interview with climate scientist Kate Marvel offers a global-scale perspective that helps frame the more particular and local topics of the rest of the book in a broader context. So the second one is called Replenish and Regreen. This section features interviews with science journalist Judith D. Swartz, historian and farmer Brian Donahue, and the Soulfire Farm founder Leah Penniman. The next section, If We Build It, has interviews with landscape architect Kate Orff, design justice pioneer Brian Lee, architect and curator Paula Antonelli, and tech executive Mustafa Suleiman. Now, I've found it interesting. The interview with Mustafa Suleiman was one of the most challenging conversations for me in the entire book. I'm an anti-capitalist with a fair amount of skepticism of the current trends in AI, and he is essentially an AI entrepreneur. So there's an inherent conflict in perspective there. However, I'm also a lifelong technophile and advocate for some degree of pursuing climate solutions within existing economic institutions. So I found the conversation deeply fascinating and informative. On another financial note, the next section is called Follow the Money. Follow the Money features interviews with writer and activist Bill McKibben, Creo Syndicate CEO Regine Clement, and former director of the Loan Programs Office in the U.S. Department of Energy, Jigar Shah. There's also a chapter called Corporations Do Better that lists 10 steps that corporations should take and 5 steps that governments should take in response to the climate crisis. So lots of exploration of the economic solutions there. The next section is Culture is the Context. Culture is the Context has interviews with filmmakers Franklin Leonard and Adam McKay, science journalist Kendra Pierre-Louis, and youth climate activists Ziye Bastida and Atisha Siddiqa. These conversations explore climate themes in pop culture media, climate journalism, and the history and importance of youth climate action. Now, I have long believed that culture and media narratives play a central role in how we understand and respond to the climate crisis. So I was especially excited to read this part of the book. I found it exciting and inspiring to read interviews with people talking about the state of the climate discourse and how we can improve it. I expect to refer back to this part periodically in my own work as a climate fiction author, climate change book reviewer, and climate radio show host. For people who don't work in writing and culture-related fields, these interviews offer a compelling introduction to how creative writing, journalism, climate communication, and political organizing can all play vital roles in the movement for climate justice. So the next part of the book is called Changing the Rules. It features interviews with Dean and Professor of Energy and Environmental Policy Kelly Sims Gallagher, political scientist Rihanna Gunn-Wright, and environmental lawyer Abigail Dillon. These conversations explore the Green New Deal and other ways that the laws and policies can contribute to climate solutions. There's also a chapter called A Blue New Deal that explores the history and current, as of publication, state of the movement for a Blue New Deal. If you're not aware, the Blue New Deal deals with the ecological policies related to the ocean and ways to bring the New Deal concept to how we relate to the ocean. And I was very excited. I was delighted to learn more about the Blue New Deal. It's an emerging concept and movement that I'd heard about, but admittedly hadn't studied in detail. Reading this book has definitely inspired me to learn more about the Blue New Deal and to do what I can to support it. So we've got 2 more parts here to mention. Community Foremost has interviews with disasterologist Samantha Montano, lawyer and organizer Colette Pichon-Battle, and Indigenous rights and climate policy expert and organizer Jade Bagay. These conversations explore community disaster preparation and response, climate mitigation, the land back movement, and how historically marginalized communities are protecting their rights and land and supporting community-led climate solutions. As a municipalist myself, I am absolutely convinced that local community organizing and local participation in democratic decision-making must play a critical role in any movement for justice, including the movement for climate justice. This is especially true for Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized communities. These communities have survived hundreds of years of colonial violence. They're seeking to establish their own sovereignty by resisting deadly pollution in their communities and by organizing community projects at the local and regional level. This is vital work both for the sake of responding to the climate crisis and for the sake of these communities liberating themselves from a long history of colonial violence and oppression. Finally, the last part of the book is about transformation. Transformation features an interview with ocean farmer and organizer Bren Smith, along with several short chapters that serve to wrap up the book and provide important framing for the preceding chapters, and for the work that lies ahead when we set the book down and head back out into the world. This includes a Climate Oath chapter, a reflection on finding joy and purpose in your own personal climate work, and a final reflection on what it would look like if we get it right on climate change. So I do want to mention one of the exciting parts of that is the climate action Venn diagram. So if you're looking for something that you personally can do in terms of climate action, they have a climate action Venn diagram that helps you to figure that out. So reading this book while living under the Trump regime felt like a wonderful breath of fresh air. People living under this regime don't have to abide by the logic of the regime. We can read, write, and talk about our own visions for society. And we can meet in our local communities to organize for change. If we work together, with our powers combined, we can still make many of the what if we get it right visions described in this book a reality. I do want to mention as well that there is an official website for the book, getitright.earth. It has many things that are related to the book and related to all of what we just talked about in the review. So getitright.earth is where to go for all of that info as well. Now it's time for the climate reading list of the week. This week's climate reading list of the week is Climate Solutions. I am always happy to talk about climate solutions. So reading about the climate crisis can be overwhelming. If you're fairly new to the subject, it's helpful to learn about climate science and what it tells us about the consequences of human-caused climate change. This includes consequences like heat waves, droughts, floods, wildfires, hurricanes, and so on. There are also reading lists for that, but at a certain point, you may find yourself looking for solutions. The books included in the Climate Solutions reading list provide an introduction to many of the most popular, proposed, and implemented solutions to the climate crisis. These are not the only solutions, and these are not the only books about these solutions. However, this list can be a good start for you in your journey into the wonderful world of climate solutions. So our first book on the list is one that I have reviewed in the past, All We Can Save. This is also edited by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson. This is a collection of women's solutions to the climate crisis, and it's a wonderful exploration of that topic. We also have, as I just discussed, What If We Get It Right by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. That was the inspiration for me picking this list for this week, because that is such a solutions-oriented book. Those two are two of the most strongly solution-oriented books on climate that I have read so far. Another one, which I'm slightly embarrassed to admit I have not read yet, is Drawdown, which is edited by Paul Hawken. This is a book that goes through systematically and explores many different solutions to the climate crisis in the sense of drawing down pollution. The focus, the idea is we've put all of this CO2 into the atmosphere. How are we going to draw down the CO2? And they explore a variety of solutions in that book as well. The next book on the list is The Climate Book, edited by Greta Thunberg. Now, like some of these books, well, all of these books to some extent will discuss the climate problem. And this on the list is probably the one that has some of the most of that as the introduction and first sections of the book. But it does also get into the solutions as well. And it is another one. Many of these solutions-oriented books are good because they are a compilation of many people's different takes on how to solve the climate crisis. if you just have one person sitting there talking about solar panels, that's one very important but very narrow solution. If you get together a lot of people talking about a lot of different topics, that's where some of the greatest magic lies. So we also have another book by Paul Hawken, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis, that explores solutions to the climate crisis through regenerative approaches, trying to regenerate ecological systems in a way that will solve the climate crisis. This may actually be the next one I review. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It is called Storytelling to Accelerate Climate Solutions. It's edited by Emily Corin and Hua Wang. And this is, as the title implies, it's all about how to use storytelling to respond to the climate crisis. This may just be my bias as a storyteller myself, but I see great importance in being able to tell accessible stories about the climate crisis as a way to inform people about what's going on, to let people feel the human impacts of the climate crisis, and to explore ideas for solutions. So pretty much every aspect of responding to the climate crisis is in some way affected by storytelling. So that one again is Storytelling to Accelerate Climate Solutions. The next one is Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope. This is by Catherine Hayhoe. If you've watched any climate communication, you've probably seen interviews with Catherine Hayhoe at some point. Some very salient and inspiring things to say about the climate crisis. We also have The Language of Climate Politics, Fossil Fuel Propaganda and How to Fight It, by Genevieve Gunther. That's another one that deals somewhat with the problems associated with the climate crisis, but sometimes you have to address the problems in order to present the solutions. And finding ways to communicate about fossil fuels, finding ways to communicate about the climate crisis, finding ways to find the language that appeals to people to speak on these issues is a very important task. Now we have two more on this list. The next one is Not Too Late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility. This is edited by Rebecca Solnit and Thelma Young Lutanataba. This is such an important issue that we discussed earlier in this episode. An unfortunate mod of climate discourse, climate rhetoric, climate sentiment ends up in the camp of despair. We see that there's a worldwide problem and we become despondent about it. But this changes the narrative to possibility, that instead of focusing entirely on what the problem is, we can find the possibilities and the solutions. And finally, we have one last title on the list here. This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, by Naomi Klein. Now, this is another one that deals in a large extent with the problems associated with the climate crisis, but it also explores solutions through different perspectives on economics and how we can use those to help people and to respond to the climate crisis. Thank you for listening to the Climate Book Review. You can find more information about this episode at climatebookreview.com. If you have any suggestions for the show, please email us at info@climatebookreview.com. If you enjoyed this episode, you can support the show by telling your friends, giving the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast apps, and of course by donating to WDBX by visiting wdbx.org. Thank you to WDBX for broadcasting this and many other good shows. Thank you to Laborio Conti for the music, and Ed Hawkins for the Warming Stripes graphic used in our logo. Learn more at showyourstripes.info. Finally, thank you to everyone who is reading, writing, and taking action in response to the climate crisis. With our powers combined, we can make climate justice a reality.